Darkness did not fall on the boat all at once. It did not crash down like a blow. It crept in, layer by layer, meter by meter, until the light from the surface turned into a cloudy memory and then disappeared completely. At that moment, USS Scorpion ceased to be a ship. It became a closed world, cut off from everything living. The depth accepted her with indifference. Inside, it was cramped. Always cramped. The corridors were narrow, like the throat of a beast. The ceilings low, as if the boat constantly reminded you. You are a guest here, and you are not welcome. The air was heavy, saturated with the smell of machine oil, metal, and human bodies. The smell of men who had not seen the sun for too long. Captain Richard Miller stood at the control station and looked at the instruments the way one looks at old scars, without emotion, without surprise. His face was gray with fatigue, his eyes dry and cold. He had long since stopped trying to look alert. Underwater, it made no sense. He had served too long, longer than he planned, longer than he promised himself. Once, he believed in simple things: the flag, duty, victory. Now, all of it felt like abstraction, convenient for those who had never heard a submarine hull creak under the pressure of hundreds of tons of water. Miller knew one thing for certain: the ocean recognizes no ideologies. It recognizes only mistakes. The boat went deeper. The metal answered the pressure with quiet, drawn-out groans. Every man aboard knew those sounds. Newcomers flinched. Veterans did not. They knew. As long as the hull groans, the boat is alive. Worse is when it becomes too quiet. Patrol routine was almost ritualistic. The same commands, the same reports, the same faces frozen in expressions of focused indifference. The crew worked precisely, almost mechanically. Mistakes were not forgiven here. The Cold War underwater looked nothing like the posters. There were no slogans, no shouting, only waiting. Long, sticky waiting, stretched across hours and days. Miller walked along the stations. His steps were slow. He knew the crew felt his mood better than any words. If the captain was calm, the boat was calm. If not, tension spread like a crack. The sonar officer sat slightly hunched forward, as if listening not only to the ocean, but to himself. The headphones clamped tightly around his head. The screen glowed dimly, almost shyly. A world you could not see with your eyes, only hear, and only if you knew what to listen for. So far, nothing. Water noise, distant echoes of merchant ships, ice sliding somewhere far above, over kilometers of dark water. Normal background, familiar, dangerous in its normality. Miller stopped at a handrail and rested his palm on it. Cold metal, real, reliable. He had always trusted things more than words. Routine kills faster than anything else, he thought. It lulls you, makes you inattentive. And the ocean loves the inattentive. Somewhere deep inside the boat, water was dripping, slowly, evenly. No one could locate the source. It appeared and disappeared. Sometimes it felt like imagination. Sometimes like the boat reminding them of itself, of the fact that it too was tired. Drip, pause, drip. The crew adjusted to this rhythm without realizing it. It crept into dreams, into thoughts, into the pauses between words. Miller glanced at his watch. Time here was conditional. Day and night merged into a single gray blur. The only markers left were watch rotations and sonar signals. He remembered the surface, remembered the sky, remembered what the horizon looked like. Those memories felt jugé, like remnants from another life. Down here, the world was simpler and more frightening. There was you. There was the boat. There was the ocean, and somewhere, an enemy you would never see. The Cold War did not require gunfire. It required endurance, patience, the ability to sit in darkness and wait for someone else to blink first. Miller knew why they were here. Soviet submarines were deploying more often, quieter, deeper. They were called missile killers, carriers of nuclear endings. They could not be stopped with words, only with tracking, only with presence. America did not shout underwater. It watched. The boat followed a route absent from maps and history books, a route that would remain unknown even in catastrophe. Secrecy here was not formality. It was survival. The captain lingered over the chart. Thin lines, numbers, depth markers. Everything looked calm. Too calm. He felt it before he heard it. Not anxiety. He knew that well. But a subtle shift. A faint sense that routine had begun to crack. Miller slowly straightened. The ocean is never empty, he thought. It only waits. The sonar continued to be silent. But this silence was different now. Denser, heavier. Like the pause before a shot that hasn't been fired yet, but already could be. Another drip echoed somewhere deep inside the hull. An USS Scorpion kept moving through the cold, indifferent Atlantic, unaware that soon darkness would stop being just darkness. At first, nothing changed. The boat held the same course, the same speed, as if the ocean had decided to continue pretending it was empty. The instruments glowed steadily. The metal groaned familiarly. Even the dripping water, somewhere deep inside the hull, fell with the same stubborn rhythm, as if time itself had stalled. But Harris felt it before he understood it. He could not explain what exactly had changed. There was no sharp signal, no alarming ping. Just the background. Felt different. Like in a crowded room, when one person suddenly goes silent. And it is that silence that draws your attention. He pressed the headphones tighter to his ears, closed his eyes, took a breath, filtering out the noise. Water, distant reflections, ice overhead, everything familiar, everything in place, except one thing. "Captain," he said quietly, almost in a whisper, as if afraid to scare the sound away. "There's something strange." Miller did not answer at once. He turned slowly, like a man who does not want to believe, but is already ready. "Talk." "I can't classify it. Too clean, too even, like someone is deliberately hiding in the background." The control room grew quieter. Even those who had not heard the words felt the change. Underwater, hearing was a collective sense. If something happened, everyone felt it. "Distance?" Miller asked. "Not sure. Very deep, and is moving with us." That was a bad word. With. Miller stepped closer to the sonar display. He knew he would see nothing concrete, only lines, shadows, hints. But sometimes that was enough. "Run the analysis again," he said. Slowly. Harris nodded, where his fingers trembled slightly as he adjusted sensitivity. Sweat slid down his back, cold and sticky. The sonar room was always cool, but now the air felt thinner. Not a merchant ship, not terrain, not ours. The signature, too controlled, like the noise is being deliberately suppressed. Miller straightened. A Soviet submarine, he thought, and it knows exactly what it's doing. "No general alarm," he ordered. "We work quietly." This was the beginning. It always started like this, not with sirens, not with commands, but with that faint realization that another mine had appeared underwater. The boat continued forward. Now every meter felt different, as if the ocean had grown tighter, as if the walls had moved closer. In the crew quarters, men felt tension without knowing why. Someone woke before his shift. Someone couldn't sleep. The subconscious reacted faster than orders. Harris listened. He listened the way one listens to a confession, without interrupting, without rushing. The sound was weak but steady. It appeared, vanished, returned, always on the edge of perception. Not an error, not an illusion. Contact confirmed, he finally said. Submerged target, likely Soviet. The words hung in the air. Miller felt something tighten inside him. He had waited for this, prepared for it. But expectation never replaced reality. Do they know about us? He asked. Harris hesitated. Not certain. But if they're as good as we think they are, then yes, most likely. That was the most terrifying part of underwater war. Not being seen, but not knowing how you were being seen, and what conclusions were being drawn. The Soviet submarine behaved strangely. It did not withdraw. It did not rush closer. It held distance, probing boundaries, testing whether the one facing it was hunter or prey. Maintain course, Miller ordered. No active pings. Let them think we're blind. It was a lie, but underwater, lies were weapons. Time grew viscous. Minutes stretched. Each new sonar report struck the nerves like a blow. Contact intensified, then nearly vanished. The Soviet boat played with depth, angles, noise. They maneuvered very carefully, Harris said. Professionally. There was something else in his voice. Not fear. Respect. Miller noticed. He felt it too. Somewhere in the dark was an opponent who knew his craft, who had the same training, who was perhaps staring at his own instruments right now, thinking the same thoughts. We're more alike than we'd like to admit, Miller thought. Claustrophobia deepened. Corridors seemed narrower, the air heavier. Someone in engineering wiped his hands on his uniform, leaving dark sweat stains. Someone began to pray, quietly, without words. The Soviet submarine suddenly changed depth. They're going lower, Harris said. Fast. That was bad. Lower meant risk. Lower meant pushing limits, or crossing them. Follow? The executive officer asked. Miller thought for only a second. But that second contained everything he had ever learned about war. No, he said. Hold depth. We don't chase. We observe. The decision created tension. Underwater, restraint often looked like weakness. But Miller knew. The first to lose patience loses. Contact remained. The Soviet submarine seemed to circle them, sometimes approaching so closely that Harris froze, afraid to breathe too loudly. Sometimes it vanished completely, forcing them to wonder if it was gone for good. Each time the signal dropped, Miller felt anxiety rise, because disappearance could mean not retreat, but preparation. Captain, Harris said quietly after several hours, I feel like they're testing us. How? Miller asked. They change modes, speed, depth, noise, watching how we react, or don't. It was chess in the dark. No board, no pieces, only moves and consequences. At one point, Miller caught himself thinking not about orders, but about the men on the other submarine, about how they sat in the same cramped steel body, about what their air smelled like, about whether they had the same dripping sound somewhere in their hull. If we met face to face, he thought, would it be war? Or just the collision of two mistakes? Contact intensified again. They're close, Harris said. His voice was tight, but controlled. Very close. Miller clenched his jaw. Continue, he said. No sudden movements. The words were simple, but behind them lay understanding. First contact had happened. There was no way back. The ocean was no longer empty. Now there was a ghost in it, and it was listening as carefully as they were. Contact did not vanish. It became part of the background, like a scar you get used to, but that still aches in bad weather. The Soviet submarine no longer fully hid, nor fully revealed itself. It stayed close, at a distance where any wrong move became a challenge. USS Scorpion glided forward as if afraid to wake the ocean. Speed minimal. Every propeller rotation calculated. Every degree of course deliberate. There was no room for spontaneity. Any improvisation could be the last. Harris listened without pause. He stopped sensing time. His world narrowed to a thin band of frequencies, to faint, almost invisible water oscillations. He caught them the way a fisherman catches a shadow beneath ice. Sometimes it felt like the sound was breathing, like it had a life of its own. "They're staying on our stern," he said after a long pause. "Adjusting distance but not falling back." Miller nodded. He was not surprised. That's how confident hunters move, he thought. In the control room, people moved more quietly than before. Words grew shorter, gazes sharper. Everyone knew. If something went wrong, there would be no time to fix it. The Soviet submarine made its first clear move. It abruptly changed depth. Down, then up, then down again. The maneuver was fast, precise, professional. Not theatrical, but obvious enough to be noticed. "They're testing our reaction," the XO said. "Let them," Miller replied. "We don't dance to their music." He ordered a course correction of only a few degrees. Barely noticeable, almost symbolic. It was a reply, just as subtle as their maneuver. A message without words. "We see you." Contact remained. But now it shifted. The Soviet submarine moved slightly aside, as if accepting the rules of the game. Cat and mouse changed places, or pretended to. Hours dragged on. Tension rose. In their bunks, men slept in fragments. Dreams were heavy and sticky. Some saw walls closing in. Others saw instruments going dark one by one. Some woke to the sound of their own breathing, too loud in the silence. Miller barely slept. He sat on the bridge, staring at instruments and thinking in probabilities. How many seconds a torpedo would need? How long a response would take? How many cities above would vanish if the chain of decisions broke wrong? Our entire civilization rests on our ability to wait, he thought, and sometimes on our ability not to fire. The Soviet submarine closed in again, closer than before, too close for comfort. The distance shrank slowly, relentlessly. "They're closing," Harris said. "This isn't a game anymore. This is pressure." Miller felt the familiar mix of anger and fear rise in his chest. He had been trained not to give in to either, but theory always cracked under practice. "Prepare an evasive maneuver," he ordered. "No sharp movements." The boat slowly changed depth, dozens of meters up, then sideways. It was a dance on the edge. One wrong step, and collision would be reality. The metal groaned again, louder, more anxious. The hull reminded them of its limits. "Pressure increasing," engineering reported. "Hold," Miller said. "For now." The Soviet submarine responded almost instantly. It mirrored the maneuver, like a reflection in a warped mirror, like a predator that refuses to release its prey. At that moment, paranoia became tangible. Men noticed details. The ventilation sounded suspicious. A relay clicked too loud. Even a neighbor's breathing became irritating. Harris caught himself afraid to blink. He felt that if he looked away for even a second, he would miss the moment everything changed. "Captain," he said quietly. It feels like they're playing with us, like they want us to make a mistake. Miller tightened his lips. They want us to show our teeth, he said, and then they'll have justification. That was the essence of underwater confrontation. Not destruction, provocation. Forcing the other side to take the first loud step. The Soviet submarine suddenly reduced its noise almost to zero. Lost contact, Harris began, then stopped. No, they're here. Just almost invisible. That was worst of all. An invisible enemy. One that dissolved into the background but stayed close. A chill ran down Miller's spine. He knew that look. Not necessarily preparation for attack. Sometimes for demonstration. All stations. Heightened readiness, he ordered. No panic. The words "no panic" always sounded like a plea. And a confession. An hour passed. Then another. Contact appeared. Vanished. The Soviet submarine circled, tightening the ring. Slowly. Methodically. Claustrophobia became physical. Walls pressed in. Sweat ran down backs. Air felt thicker. Men moved carefully, like in a room that might be mined. Miller caught himself counting steps. He didn't know why, just to anchor his mind. 1, 2, 3. He remembered exercises, theoretical scenarios. They looked neat on paper. Here, there was no neatness, only uncertainty. The Soviet submarine made another move. It aligned on an almost parallel course. "They're right there," Harris whispered. "Very close." In that moment, no one doubted. They were being heard as clearly as they heard the enemy. Two crews sat in darkness, separated by water, fully aware of each other's presence. Without words, without signal. This was not a contest of machines. It was a confrontation of people. Miller closed his eyes for a second. Images flashed. Cities, faces, lights. Everything that could vanish because of one wrong decision. He opened his eyes. "Continue the maneuver," he said. "We won't be the first to break." The boat slowly moved aside. Contact wavered, then steadied. The Soviet submarine stayed with them. The game continued. And with every passing minute, it became clearer. This was no longer simple tracking. It was a test of nerves, of will, of who would acknowledge the limit first. The ocean remained silent, but that silence carried too much meaning. Pressure does not always feel like pain. Sometimes it comes as exhaustion that sleep cannot cure, as a thought that returns again and again, no matter how hard you try to push it away. Underwater, pressure was everywhere, in the hull, in the ears, in the minds. USS Scorpion no longer lived by hours, but by nerves. Men moved more slowly, more carefully. They spoke more quietly, as if afraid the ocean might overhear an extra word. Even laughter, rare and strained, sounded inappropriate, almost blasphemous. Harris began confusing sounds. Not often, not critically, but enough for him to notice. He caught himself double-checking the same signal, returning to already classified noise, doubting his own memory. "It's fine," he once told himself, staring at the screen. "You're just tired." But underwater, fatigue was not just a state. It was weakness, and the ocean sensed weakness. In engineering, Chief Thompson began counting steps between stations. He told no one, just counted. 42 steps there, 42 back. If he lost count, he started over. It calmed him, gave him a sense of control in a world where control barely existed. Someone began chewing more than necessary. Someone smoked secretly despite regulations. Small discipline violations were symptoms, not causes. Cracks came from within. Miller saw it all, or at least felt it. He knew the boat could withstand ocean pressure. It was built for that. People were not. Their limits were less obvious and far more dangerous. Sometimes he caught glances, short, guarded. Men looked at him without realizing it. The way you look at a surgeon before an operation, or a judge. Tell us what to do, those looks said, and tell us everything will be fine. But Miller could not promise that. He could only promise to make decisions and carry them. At night, if the word even applied here, he sat alone in his cabin. Light dimmed. A weak lamp cast shadows, making the walls uneven, as if the boat were breathing. The drip continued somewhere in the ventilation. Drip, a pause. Drip. The sound drove him mad. Too regular, too persistent. He caught himself waiting for it, counting seconds between drops, getting angry when the rhythm shifted. That's how it begins, he thought. Not with screams, not with panic, but with a detail you can't ignore. He thought about orders, about how easy it was topside to talk about deterrence, balance of power, about how those words turned down here into sweaty palms and shaking voices. The Soviet submarine hadn't gone anywhere. It was nearby, always nearby. Even when sonar was silent, its presence felt like a Zhuzhoev's glad in the dark. Harris began hearing it in his sleep. Not seeing, hearing. The same sound. Quiet. Insistent. He woke feeling late. Feeling he had missed something critical. "You okay?" a crewmate asked him once. "Yeah," Harris replied too quickly. "I'm just tired." Underwater, everyone was just tired. Moral dilemmas arrived suddenly, in conversations cut short, in pauses between reports, in thoughts that refused to take shape. If they attack, we respond. If we respond, what happens next? Miller understood. His crew were not fanatics. They did not crave war. They were professionals. And that made the situation dangerous, because professionals understood consequences too well. At one point, someone broke in medical. A young sailor, barely more than a boy, complained of chest pain. The medic examined him, checked his heart, his pressure. "Panic attack," he said quietly. "Not dangerous, but he needs rest." Rest. A word that sounded like mockery here. Miller signed the order. The sailor was temporarily pulled from watch. It was the right decision, and a bad signal at the same time, because everyone thought, what if I'm next? Psychological pressure wasn't constant. It came in waves. Sometimes it felt manageable. Sometimes like the boat would tear apart not from depth, but from tension inside. The Soviet submarine reminded them of itself, briefly, almost mockingly. Contact appeared and vanished, as if to say, "We're still here." Harris felt anger rise inside him. Pure, cold. He caught himself wishing it would all end. Anyway, even badly. That thought scared him more than anything. He leaned back, closed his eyes, focused on breathing. In, out, in, out. You don't get to want that, he told himself. You're here to listen. Nothing more. Miller noticed as he passed by. Saw Harris clenching his fingers, the tension in his shoulders. He said nothing. Sometimes silence was the best support. In the control room, and the light seemed even dimmer. Shadows lengthened, faces sharpened. Someone began talking to the instruments as if they could answer. We're all losing our minds a little, Miller thought. The question is who first. He remembered an old instructor who once said, "Underwater, you don't fight the enemy. You fight yourself." Back then, it sounded poetic. Now, brutally true. The Soviet submarine kept playing, sometimes disappearing for hours, forcing speculation, sometimes returning so close it felt like voices could be heard through the water. Each return struck the nerves. The drip continued. Drip, pause, drip. Miller caught himself hating the sound, hating the ocean, hating a war that never fired, but demanded sacrifices every day. If we get out of this, he thought, we'll never be the same. And somewhere in the darkness, on the other side of the water, other men were likely thinking the same thing. Aggression underwater never looks like a flash. It begins with silence, when intention appears. The Soviet submarine sent no messages, no signals, no active sonar. But something changed in its movement. Caution vanished. The game vanished. Pressure remained. Contact steady, Harris said. And it's changing. Miller looked up. Explain. They're increasing speed. Very smoothly, but it's acceleration. Closing distance. The words landed heavy. Someone held their breath. Someone checked fastenings, as if bracing for impact. Distance? Miller asked. Shrinking, slowly, but deliberately. This was the first clear signal. Not accident, not test, a gesture. Underwater, gestures replaced words. Red flag, Miller thought. Here it is. Battle readiness, he ordered. No quiet, no sharp movements. These words had been spoken on countless missions, but now they carried weight, as if everyone understood. If it breaks today, there will be no excuses. In the torpedo room, men moved with drilled precision. Cold metal chilled their palms. The smell of lubricant was sharper than usual. Everyone knew their role. Everyone hoped it wouldn't be needed. The Soviet submarine came closer. They're on a parallel course, Harris said, holding himself together. And they're noisier, not critical, but enough for us to hear. Demonstration, the XO said. They want us to know. Miller stayed silent. He stared at the instruments, thinking of the men on the other side of the water. Who commanded there? What he was hearing in his headphones? Whether he felt the same pressure? If he's nervous, Miller thought, he might do something stupid. The Soviet submarine abruptly changed depth. Fast, Harris said. They're going down, very fast. The hull answered with a dull groan. Pressure increased. An alarm rang in engineering. We can't follow, came the report. It's dangerous. Miller knew. He always knew where the limit lay. And he knew Soviet boats sometimes crossed it. Not because they could, but because orders left no choice. Hold depth, he ordered. Do not follow. The Soviet submarine vanished from direct contact. 1 second, 2. Enough to make the tension tangible. Lost, Harris began, then stopped. Contact. They're under us. Very close. This was no longer pressure. It was intrusion. They're passing directly beneath the keel, Harris said, breathing faster. Too close. Someone cursed softly. Someone crossed himself. In moments like this, religion returned suddenly. Cold sweat slid down Miller's back. He knew underwater collisions rarely forgave mistakes. 2 steel bodies, each carrying more destructive power than all past wars combined. Course correction, he said. Now, slowly. The boat responded. The hull shuddered. The Soviet submarine passed below, nearly brushing. The distance was less than a football field. Underwater, that meant dangerously close. Then Harris heard what he feared most. Captain, he swallowed. Sounds like torpedo tube doors opening. The word sounded like a sentence. Confirm, Miller said. His voice was flat. Too flat. Not 100%, but the noise, characteristic. The control room grew suffocating. Air compressed. Everyone understood. They were at the edge. not abstractly, not theoretically, for real. If they're preparing to fire, the XO began. No, Miller cut him off. He looked at the instruments but saw something else. A world map, lines connecting cities. One torpedo becoming a chain reaction. This is the moment, he thought. The one they write about afterward, if anyone is left to write. The Soviet submarine did not fire. Seconds stretched into eternity. Miller's fingers clenched the rail until his knuckles whitened. His heartbeat felt too loud, as if everyone could hear it. Then, movement. There. Turn away, Harris said. His voice wavered. Slowly, but they're disengaging. The Soviet submarine altered course. Not abruptly, not theatrically. As if to say, we could have. And that was enough. The tension didn't vanish. It changed shape, became dull, heavy. Contact weakening, Harris continued. Their increase in distance. Miller exhaled slowly, realizing only then he'd been holding his breath. Maintain observation, he said. No pursuit. In the torpedo room, men stood frozen, as if unsure it was over. Or rather, that it wasn't. Sweat ran down backs, hands shook. Someone laughed quietly, nervously, then stopped. Miller knew this moment would stay with them forever, as reminder, a scar. We came too close, he thought. Next time the ocean may not grant a second chance. The Soviet submarine dissolved into water noise, but its shadow remained, in minds, in pauses, in the drip that continued somewhere deep inside the hull. Drip, pause, drip. The aggressive response had happened, not with a shot, but with intent. And now everyone aboard knew it would only get worse. The point of no return never looked ceremonial. No fanfare, no line on a map. It arrives quietly, in the pause between two breaths, in the second when no one speaks because any word might be the last unnecessary one. After the Soviet maneuver, silence changed. Not relief, vigilance. Like a room where a threat has just been spoken, but the door hasn't slammed shut yet. USS Scorpion continued moving, but now every meter felt like a step on thin ice. Contact weakened, but did not disappear. The Soviet submarine moved aside, increased distance, yet didn't fully break away. It left a thread, thin, almost invisible, but strong. Harris sat motionless. He refused to remove his headphones even when offered a break. He shook his head. His world was too fragile to leave even for a minute. They're still with us, he said finally. Just farther and lower. Miller nodded. He felt it without words, and the ocean rarely released prey immediately, especially when both sides understood the stakes. No one in the control room relaxed. Battle readiness remained high. Men moved carefully, afraid to disturb balance. Discipline here rested not on regulation, but fear of error. Miller stepped to the chart. Route lines now looked mocking, too straight, too confident. Underwater, there were no straight paths, only compromises. We've gone too far, he thought, and there's no retreat. Orders from the surface arrived faster than expected. Short, encoded, emotionless. Continue contact. Confirm enemy intentions. Do not lose target. Miller stared at the paper until the words blurred. He knew what lay behind them. Analysts, command. Fear of appearing weak. Fear of losing initiative. But down here, initiative wasn't measured in words. It was measured in seconds and irreversible decisions. He folded the order and slipped it into his pocket. Not defiance. Delay. Captain, the XO asked. Orders. We continue observing, Miller said, but no closing in. No demonstrations. A subtle deviation, almost invisible. But underwater, such deviations decided fate. The Soviet submarine changed behavior again. "They're reducing speed," Harris said after an hour. Very slowly, like they're waiting. "For what?" someone asked. Harris shrugged, eyes fixed on the screen. "Us." That was the most dangerous thing. When the enemy doesn't hurry. When he gives you space to make the move yourself. Pressure rose inside Miller. Different from before. Not panic, not fear. Responsibility. Heavy. Viscous, like oil. If we withdraw, we're weak. If we advance, we provoke. If we stay, everything could collapse on its own. There were no right choices underwater, only less bad ones. He remembered his first dive. Young, confident. Then the ocean seemed an opponent you could understand. Now he knew. The ocean was just the stage. The real drama was always human. Soviet submarine sent another signal, almost imperceptible. Frequency shift. A brief noise burst that vanished instantly. This, Harris hesitated, feels like a signal. Not for us. For them. Internal. Preparation? The XO asked. Possibly. Miller closed his eyes. Numbers flashed. Time windows. Distances. Probabilities. Everything he'd learned compressed into one question. Where's the line? If the Soviet boat was preparing to launch, even a demonstration, there would be no time to think. The response would be automatic, and that response would start a chain no one could stop. Miller looked at his crew. Pale faces, exhausted eyes. They trusted him, not as a symbol, as a man. "I have no right to be wrong," he thought, "and no right to pass this upward." "Harris," he said quietly, "if they enter an active phase, tell me first, even if you're not sure." "Yes, sir," Harris replied hoarsely. Minutes crawled. Contact held. The Soviet submarine neither advanced nor withdrew. It hovered, awaiting response. Miller felt tension reach its limit. Minor mistakes began. A switch flipped wrong. A command repeated twice. Nothing critical. Yet. Pressure doesn't break you instantly, he thought. It waits until you're tired. Then it happened. "Captain," Harris said. And for the first time, fear was in his voice. "They've changed suddenly. I'm detecting noise consistent with torpedo readiness." Silence fell, thick, real. "Confirm," Miller said. "Not 100%. But if this isn't it, then I don't know my job." Miller closed his eyes for an instant. But in that instant he saw everything. Reports, hearings, justifications, and millions of people who would never know how close they came to the edge. If I order counter-readiness, they'll see it. If I don't, we may have no time left. He remembered his instructor's words. Sometimes the best order is the one you don't give. "Cancel escalation," Miller said at last. "We disengage." The words were quiet, their meaning deafening. "Sir?" The XO turned. "Surface orders." "I know," Miller replied. "I take responsibility." It was a breach, not overt, but enough to change everything. "Go deeper," he continued. "Minimum noise, no abrupt maneuvers." The boat moved, slowly, reluctantly. The hull groaned under load. Pressure increased. The Soviet submarine did not react immediately. Seconds passed, eternity underwater. Then Harris exhaled. "Their noise. Changing. They're not following. Looks like they're stopping." Miller opened his eyes. He didn't smile, didn't relax. He knew. Not the end, but a decision. "Contact weakening," Harris said. "They're holding position." Silence shifted, still tense, but cracked. Awareness seeped through. The worst had been avoided. The boat continued away, slowly, without haste, like someone who doesn't want to show he's retreating. The Soviet submarine stayed behind. Its shadow dissolved into ocean noise. Tension drained from Miller, not fully. It left behind emptiness, heavy, exhausting. I just changed something, he thought, and no one will ever know. He knew his decision would be analyzed, condemned, praised, or forgotten. It didn't matter now. What mattered was that the world kept existing. The drip continued in the ventilation. Drip, pause, drip. And now the sound carried not madness, but reminder. Sometimes to win, you just have to leave. Relief did not come. When contact finally vanished, no one applauded. No one smiled. The silence in the control room was heavy, waiting, as if the ocean still listened, wondering if they'd changed their minds. USS Scorpion continued deeper, until instruments showed safe distance. Pressure stabilized. Metal stopped groaning so loudly. But nothing stabilized inside the men. Harris removed his headphones for the first time in hours. His hands shook. He stared at the empty screen, as if not believing it, then lowered his gaze and slowly exhaled. All clear, he said, but his voice lacked certainty. Engineering found a microfracture in a mounting bracket. Nothing critical, fixable, but enough to remind them the boat had paid a price too, as had the people. One sailor sat on the deck back against the wall, staring into nothing. His breathing was uneven. The medic knelt beside him, hand on his shoulder. No words were needed. Miller stayed alone on the bridge. He looked at instruments but saw something else. The moment he could have ordered differently. The alternative where everything went wrong. We survived, he thought. But this isn't victory. He knew the reports would be dry. The wording careful. No one would write about shaking hands. About the dripping water. About how close they came to the point where reports would no longer exist. They would return to the surface. Hug families. Drink to a successful mission. But something would remain here, underwater, between layers of steel, in the pauses between thoughts. The price had been paid, not in blood, but in memory. And it would stay with them forever.